Hi, everybody. Welcome to Cosmopolitics, and thank you for joining us. I am joined by my good friend Stephen Cook at the Council on Foreign Relations to talk about the visit of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia to Washington. Stephen, as you know from previous conversations, is the Enrico Mattei Senior Fellow for Middle East and Africa Studies at CFR, and also the author of several books, but the most recent is The End of Ambition, America's Past, Present, and Future in the Middle East. So I can't think of anybody better to discuss these issues with and discuss the visit. And if you remember from our previous conversations, he's also very witty and charming. So very good to have you with us today, Stephen.
Hey, what's up, Elise?
Good to have you. Thanks for joining us. So let's just kind of frame the visit and the discussion by talking about this is the first visit of Mohammed bin Salman from the Obama era. And obviously, there's been, a lot that's happened. The election of Trump twice. There was the Khashoggi affair. But I think, how MBS is kind of representing himself now, not just in his relationship with Washington and on the world stage. I mean, when you look at the pomp and circumstance that's going to be surrounding this visit, U.S. and U.S. Saudi relations are undoubtedly in a pretty good place right now.
Oh, I think that they're in the best place they've been in a very, very long time. Even during the Biden administration, when, if everybody remembers correctly, the president tried to freeze out MBS. Not long after Biden entered the White House, he said he wouldn't talk to the Crown Prince, that the Crown Prince had to talk to the Secretary of Defense. Then it was Lloyd Austin, and that was who his counterpart was. Basically said, don't come to Washington. Then Biden was forced by circumstance to go to Riyadh and meet MBS. And even then, the relationship was pretty warm thereafter. But now it's like it really never was before. I don't believe I remember an era in which the relationship was as close and the coordination as important. Look, Saudi Arabia is now the most important country to the United States in the Middle East. You can't really do anything in the region now without Saudi Arabia. The big heavyweights used to be Egypt, Iraq, Syria, Jordan. Now it's Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. But Saudi Arabia is the big dog among those.
Yeah, and I want to get to kind of the larger arc because I think, when we think of Saudi, we think of oil, we think of, defense, we think of security. But, I remember, you're going to remember this, when the head of the Arab League, was it Abu Nasser or it was Amir Musa? He said something like to the Gulfies, he said, you bring the money, we'll bring the ideas. And I think, he was PNG'd from the Gulf at the time. But I think now, I think anybody that follows the region understands that not only the money, but the vision is really coming out of these Gulf states, obviously the UAE, but we're talking about Saudi Arabia. And I think Saudi Arabia in particular, with this vision of Mohammed bin Salman and the 2030 vision, this isn't about oil anymore. This is about so much more. And it's not about only Middle East peace. And it's not only about Iraq. It's about, if the 30s, when the relationship started with Saudi Arabia based on oil, I think oil is really not even the most important part of the relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the most extraordinary things about the evolution of the U.S.-Saudi relationship, particularly over the course of the last 5 years or so. Now, first, let me say, I don't remember which Secretary General of the Arab League who said it, but it's
I think
always
it was
been
Amr Musa
it might
because
have
he
been.
was then PNG'd in
Well, I mean,
in the Emirates.
it's a
I
very
know.
Egyptian thing to say, to
Yeah,
basically kind of dismiss the Gulf states as, sort of the ATM for,
right, for the region.
the cosmopolitan Egyptians
Right, right,
and their great ideas about
right.
things. But first of all, is never the case. And you do see this power shift and where the kind of regional leadership, the thinking about the region and individual countries in the region more broadly is taking place in the Gulf. The Gulf is driving the bus in the region right now, and it's Mohammed bin Salman. Not to sound like a kind of slavish cheerleader of the Saudis, but with his which Vision 2030, and because the Saudis are the big player, they're really driving the politics in the region. And as you point out, there's going to be probably little publicly said about oil in this conversation while he's in Washington. It's going to be about AI. It's going to be about tech. It's going to be about web. There's going to be lots to say about the F-35. There's going to be lots to say about regional integration, a potential defense pact. Not that much about energy.
And I think what's really interesting, the way you talk to, people that follow the region, U.S. Saudi officials, this isn't, and again, it's really hard to kind of look at these countries in the Gulf or look at Saudi Arabia and say, oh yeah, they have a lot of money, they're investing in the United States. But it seems to me what they're really doing is they're investing in their own, like these are down payments on building their own sectors. Like you've heard the Saudis say, if Aramco was the first oil company that was kind of built on the back of U.S. knowledge, innovation, the U.S. kind of helped develop the Saudi oil sector. Now they're making investments, as you said, in tech, in AI, in renewables. It's really weird, and we could get to that or not if we run out of time. But the idea that the administration isn't really keen on green energy, but the Saudis are so interested and invested in renewables. It's all about power. And I don't mean power as in the, global power. I mean, as in powering these AI data centers, powering, what's going on in the region with the tech. And I feel like what the Saudis are doing is they're making these investments in strengthening not just U.S. deals. And there are hundreds, and we should say, like, there are hundreds of billions of dollars in deals that are going to be taking place. That not just kind of some of them were announced when President Trump went to Saudi in May, but they're going to be announced over the next couple of days. Yes, they're investing in U.S. sectors, but then this is really powering 2030. I think it's, again, with the vision, their vision is we're not just buying something, we're creating something by investing in the United States.
Yeah, look, the goal here, this is all consistent with Vision 2030, under Mohammed bin Salman, there's been a total re-engineering of a way in which Saudi Arabia does business, the way it does politics, and what it invests in. I think the heavy emphasis on technology. Look, if we were having this conversation about MBS coming in 5 years ago, we would be talking about things like NEOM and all these cities and infrastructure that they're building. But they've sort of de-emphasized these giga projects. I mean, they're gonna do them. They're quite expensive. They're gonna finish them off. NEOM is being scaled back. But really, what they're talking about is becoming an AI and tech powerhouse. There is a
global power, not just in the region, but a global power that connects Asia, Europe, India, Africa, the whole,
the whole thing. And there's actually a competition within the region over who's going to play that role in the region. And the Saudis, again, being the biggest country with lots of resources to command. I mean, the only country that can come close to what the Saudis are trying to do, and in fact, they have a head start, are the Emiratis. But the Saudis are making a broad pitch to the United States and others that it should be this AI powerhouse. I expect that you'll see agreements with major tech firms, big agreements with major tech firms on this issue.
Yeah, there's this Saudi investment conference. Now, there have been a couple of conferences over the past several months. One was in Saudi, the FII that you and I have both been to, Future Investment Initiative. Then there was a conference in Miami. I'm not even going to try to remember what it was called. But all these deals
FII Miami. I think
FII
is what
Miami,
it was.
sure, I think so. But but the idea that the US, they want to be an equal partner in these companies. Like it's not like only that they're buying, stakes in these companies and making investment in these
Right.
companies. They want to be known for this as opposed to being known for like an oil,
Right.
different.
That's
That's part
exactly
of their
right. They
diversification.
want to be AI. They want to be advanced manufacturing. Those kinds of things that, when if in the 20th century they were known as, the gas station to the world, to be crude about it, pun on top of pun here. We've got the Saudis positioning, right? The Saudis positioning themselves in the tech sector for the 21st century. And it's not just about, as you said, it's not just about owning a piece of Google or, Nvidia or something like that, which they don't, it's being able to capture the technology and to be a provider of services and part of the development and exploitation of these technologies. Um, Look, AI is going to be a source of national power, and whoever is ahead of the curve or on the curve is going to be a very, very powerful country. And I think it's questions that Americans have to ask themselves. I mean, uh, we're going to be tied very, very close to these countries going forward, given the resources that they have at their disposal. And they're going to be part of our big play to command AI going forward.
At a time where we're in this AI war and this greater power competition with China, I mean, these countries, whether it's Saudi, the UAE, they're making a choice. It's like at some point you have to make a choice, right? Are we going to go
Or are
with,
they making a
not that,
choice?
look, China is still one of Saudi Arabia's biggest trading partners.
Biggest trading
But
partner.
when it comes to tech and it comes to, this interoperability, and we'll talk about defense in a minute, you can only go one way, right? And it
Right.
seems like they've made the choice to double down with the United States.
I think they're also, in making that choice to double down with the United States, they're not giving the United States a choice. I said this to a
Interesting.
senior Gulf official. I said, is this really kind of a backdoor way of having a defense pact with the United States without having the defense pact? Given how important AI is to the future and a
Yeah.
source of national power, would we not come to the defense of countries that are partners of ours in the development and exploitation of AI? I don't think so. Now, this Gulf
What'd the
official
Gulf
sort
person
of
say? Yeah.
he bobbed and
Yanni.
weaved, but I think I don't think he really wanted to say so explicitly that that is in fact the case. And I don't think a lot of people think about it in those terms. I think the Gulf states definitely do.
Yeah, we're joined by Stephen Cook of the Council on Foreign Relations. We're talking about Mohammed bin Salman, Saudi Crown Prince visit to Washington, his meeting with President Trump, and then there's going to be another big security business conference. All the heads of
At the Kennedy
U.S.
Center.
at the Kennedy Center.
You got to use
You-
it for something these
Well,
days.
for now, we got to call it the Kennedy Center. Who knows what it's going to be called in a few? Might be called Trump Center, might be called the MBS Center. Who the hell knows? Um, but, really the big titans of industry, the CEOs will be there, and then they'll also be at a dinner tomorrow night. Really, he's being treated, obviously, King Fahd is the head of state.
King
Um,
Salman.
King, yeah,
Salman.
King Salman. Did I say King Salman or I
You
said
said
King?
Fahad. And I was like,
Uh, King Salman, sorry about that. I was thinking way, way back.
way
King
back.
Salman, his father, MBS's father, is the head of state, but for all intents and purposes, King Salman is aging, and MBS is really running the country, and he's being treated. The pomp and circumstance behind this visit. This is a state visit in any other name.
1,000 people in the delegation.
1,000 people delegation.
the last time he visited Washington, there weren't enough limousines in Washington for the test delegation.
Well,
I
now that
mean,
we have more Uber drivers, so who knows? But I wanted, you mentioned the security pact, and again, we're not used to security being the second thing we talk about, but there is going to be a security pact, and it seems like it's going to be it's not going to be a treaty that will require uh
congressional approval.
congressional approval, but it will be along the lines of what we just signed with Qatar. Um, and it'll be, unprecedented security guarantees for a country in the region, kind of along the lines of what we have with Israel almost. Um, what do you think is realistic here, and why does this matter so much to Riyadh right now? And talk about the idea that, again, it's not just about, we'll come to your defense. It's about using U.S. systems, using U.S.
Right.
weapons, the interoperability
Right.
of U.S. and Saudi Arabia for joint defense.
Yeah, look, I think that this is consistent with what the United States has been trying to do back through from to the second half of the Biden administration. If you looked at what the Biden administration was negotiating with the Saudis that never came to fruition, there were huge pieces of this that were about technology, that were about AI, that were about nuclear energy, that were not just about guns and trucks and interoperability. And what that says is it's about the United States trying to outmaneuver the Chinese in the region. And the Saudis are willing to play ball. I mean, they're not willing to give up their relationship with China. As you point out, it's Saudi Arabia's largest trading partner. But at the same time, if it means the kind of tightening of the U.S. security relationship, and in fact, and importantly, it's written down.
Mm-hmm.
That is really important to the Saudis because
Mm-hmm.
prior to this, it's basically been a gentleman's agreement.
Gentleman's agreement.
We've said through the Carter Doctrine, we said we would protect the oil fields of the region from external threats. And then there was the Reagan corollary, which was the United States would protect the oil fields of the Persian Gulf or the Gulf, from internal threats as well. The Carter Doctrine was like 186 words, and the Reagan Doctrine corollary to the Reagan corollary to the Carter Doctrine was never actually written down. So it was essentially a gentleman's agreement. And in the summer of 2019, after Iran attacked
The
Saudi
U.S.
Arabia,
didn't do
this
anything.
president said, "What? They didn't attack us. They attacked Saudi Arabia.
Right.
We don't have to do anything." So now, it is the Saudis are saying you've got to write it down, and the Biden administration was willing to write it down. The Trump administration was really willing to write it down in the form of an executive order, and that will include a variety of things, tech, whatever, and military hardware. And as we've been speaking, there's been a news flash that said the president has said he'll sell F-35s
Why is that
to Saudi
important
Arabia.
for those people that are listening?
Well, I mean, like F-35 is a big deal. It's the America's most important airplane, fifth generation fighter. The Israelis have it. The Israelis, the only way they were able to do Operation Rising Line, which was the operation against Iran over the summer, was because they had F-35 and it was extraordinarily sophisticated. I suspect that, by the time the Saudis get F-35, which, by the way, I'm in Israel and the Israelis defense establishment is opposed to this, the
We have to
Israelis will
thank
be
you
well
for staying up
compensated.
so late, by the way.
It's not that late here. The Israelis will be well compensated because it's U.S. law that says the United States has to maintain Israel's qualitative military edge over any potential group or single adversary of Israel. But it's going to be it's a very, very big deal for the Saudis to have that kind of military hardware.
Well, okay, go in. Let's talk a little more about Israel and the F-35 and the whole connection. Okay, so on one hand, the administration is trying to negotiate this normalization between Saudi and Israel, and I think everyone's going to focus on the fact that it won't be done during this visit, which is not going to be. But MBS has said, yes, we're going to do it. That's the goal. It's about the sequencing and the timing and what the Israelis have to do before we sign on the dotted line,
Right.
which is basically a pathway to the two-state solution.
Yeah. So look,
So it's not really, the Saudis say it's not really in dispute. It's just about, when the climate and look, let's be honest, Israel isn't ready for a two-state solution. I don't know when they will be, but they're not even taking steps to kind of advance the president's 20-point agenda on Gaza. So, the Saudis are like, yeah, we'll do it, but you have to do your part first to the Israelis.
Yeah, I think the Saudi position, remember prior to October 7th, and I think even well after October 7th, the Saudi position was it's not really a question of if we normalize,
But
it's
one.
when we will normalize. And then, of course, the way in which Israel's military operations unfolded and subsequently made it more and more difficult. And the Saudis have been clear. We remain interested, but we don't think we have a partner in the current Israeli government. So certainly the president wants to advance the normalization. It's building on the Abraham Accords, which happened under his first watch. President Biden did the same thing. I think it would be a mistake to link the defense pact with
Yeah, the Israelis
normalization.
have said that they don't want to. We'll give you we'll say yes on the F-35s if you normalize. At the same time, people like Smotrich on the far right and others are being like, we don't really care about normalization.
So
And
the word
it doesn't really seem like Trump, he can pay lip service to the Israelis, giving their green light, but it sounds like he's going ahead.
this is the Israeli position, and I think it's one that's held more broadly than folks would suggest, which is sure, normalization would be nice, but we're not going to trade up normalization for a two-state solution because we believe a Palestinian state is a danger to Israel. And that is something that's a widely shared
Widely,
sentiment after
certainly now.
October 7th.
Right.
They just don't believe that the Israelis that the Palestinians want to live side by side in peace with them. And so they are concerned that the president is so eager to build on his legacy of the Abraham Accords is going to pressure the Israelis on a two-state solution at a moment when they are not really interested, and that this will cause a crisis in the U.S.-Israel relationship with a president who's been extraordinarily Israel-friendly.
Multiple
And I'll
analysts
tell you,
yeah,
watch Israel next Sunday. Today it's almost
Monday.
Tuesday for me, but it's
Yeah.
Monday for you. 6 days from now, the Israeli right is planning on having a big protest in Jerusalem to pressure Netanyahu not to be pressured by the United States on a two-state solution.
Interesting. There have been multiple analysts describe MBS as putting, Saudi first rather than focusing on regional issues. And some say he's, in doing so, he's putting America first because he's definitely doubling down with Trump. Let's talk about the Crown Prince's objectives for this visit, how they differ from what Washington might want out of these meetings. It doesn't seem like, that there's much daylight here. So where do you think the potential are
Well, I
there any
think that
rub?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple things. One, I think the president is more eager to push normalization and make a dramatic announcement on normalization than the Saudis are ready for. And he's going to
I
try to
think he
push.
knows I think he knows. I think he's been told, my understanding is it'll happen, but it's not happening tomorrow.
Right, but like you never know with Trump, right? He may,
Might
wake
just
up tomorrow
fall
morning
into
and
in the
post on
meeting.
social
Right.
media, "I've
Right.
secured agreement from the Crown Prince for
Right. Right.
normalization with Israel," and
Right.
then
Right.
in exchange for a Palestinian state. And I've already spoken to Bibi, and there's going to be a Palestinian state. And I think the Saudis have to be worried about that. I know the Israelis are worried about that as well. I think the other thing is, and we saw it with the Emiratis, the president is promising the F-35, but it still has to, I mean, he can go over the heads of Congress, which he's done before, but in, 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 consistent with the Arms Control Export Act, any sale over $25 million, Congress has a say on and can put a hold on. Then there are all kinds of concerns within the U.S. intelligence community about how much Chinese stuff, electronic equipment are in Saudi systems and
Right.
their proximity to the F-35 and what might happen there.
Right.
Notice the Emiratis don't have the F-35s that were promised after the Abraham Accords. Congress successfully put the kibosh on that and had a willing partner with the Biden administration. Now, Trump, as I said, has gone over the heads of Congress on arms sales before, but it's going to be a long time before these F-35s are going to be delivered. So who knows what's going to happen? So I think those are the real issues here. Is the president really wants to drive hard on normalization. The Saudis are going to want the F-35s. And there's just going to be different speeds for these
Right.
kind of big issues.
Well, I mean, look, if I'm Saudi Arabia and I'm looking at the UAE and Bahrain and the other countries that joined the Abraham Accords and what they've gotten out of it from Israel, might ask for a steeper price. And, I feel like the Saudis' position is the Abraham Accords is has to go hand in hand with some kind of larger regional, like the Abraham Accords is one thing as
Right.
part
The
of a
Saudis aren't
larger
joining the Abraham Accords. They're going to have something of their own. They
right,
think that, they're
right.
too, they are the regional leader, and they don't want to join an existing. They want an existing set of agreements. They want to have their own in which they will be preeminent in. What that looks like, I think right now remains entirely theoretical because their demand a credible pathway to a two-state solution is not something, and I think this is shared again across much of the Israeli political spectrum, not something the Israelis are prepared to do at this moment. But at least it's something that we're all going to talk about, and everybody recognizes there is a certain inevitability to this. I think the Israelis are hoping that the longer this goes on, the price, and as the Gaza situation stabilizes, quote unquote, stabilizes, the price that the Saudis are asking will go down. Who
Will go
knows whether
down.
that will go down, right? That it'll be like it was prior to October 7th, where the Saudis were extraordinarily ambiguous about what it was the Israelis needed to do on the
Yani,
Palestinian
just
front.
yeah, yeah.
Some issues need to be resolved,
Inshallah
that kind
bukra.
of.
Um, let's talk quickly about Sudan. I have a couple more questions and we'll finish up. We're joined by Stephen Cook of the Council on Foreign Relations from Israel right now, actually talking about the visit of Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, to Washington. I think he arrives tonight. There's a very interesting dynamic emerging between Saudi and UAE and the Turkey Qatar camp over Gaza. And how does this play into what is going to be discussed about the future of Gaza reconstruction governance? Because we really haven't seen any. We've seen an end to the fighting. We've seen some more trucks go in, and I will say, yesterday or the day before, I think 800 trucks went into Gaza. So aid is getting in. But we haven't seen any of these troops, this international stabilization force. We haven't seen anything about governance. It's kind of stalled.
Yeah, I mean, on the humanitarian aid front, what's happening is you've got what's called the CMC, this coordination center that's been established in Kiryat Gat, which, by the way, all the Israelis snicker at because the Kiryat Gat's sort of this like periphery town, but now all of a sudden there's like American Marines wandering around this place, and they're riding herd on the Israelis. The Israelis have kind of lost control over the aid situation. So if there's a targeted number of trucks that need to go in a week, and it's not let's say X number of trucks that are going through and it's X minus one, the Americans call the Israelis and like, where are the rest of the trucks? The Israelis feel obligated to make up so that they meet that target. So yes, there's a lot of aid going in, and the United States is monitoring this totally independently of the Israelis, which is putting a lot of pressure on the Israelis to perform. But you're quite right on these other issues on governance. I think that there's been some names floated for this technocratic government, but nothing's really happened. There's no this question of an international security force, Egyptian led Palestinian police, maybe some Indonesians, who knows? It's not really clear and the big question here in Israel is who's actually going to disarm Hamas? And
Right. Well,
the
nobody's
media
yeah.
reports are that the
And
president is
is
sort of
would
nodding on with.
Hamas disarm it?
Well, right. That Hamas has said clearly it's not going to lay down its arms. So what's going to happen? And so in this, you see the Saudis kind of tiptoeing backwards along with the Emiratis, because unlike the Qataris and Turks who sought to litigate this 20-point plan in a way that preserves Hamas, because from their perspective, whether it's ideological or not, from their perspective, Hamas is the power in Gaza, and you got to work with what you got to work with. The Saudis and Emiratis are closer to the Israeli position on Hamas, that Hamas should be disarmed and it shouldn't take part in governance,
Well, I
both of
mean,
which are
yeah,
extremely hard to achieve.
yeah. Well, look, on Syria, we had the Syrian president here last week. That's really an effort by the Saudis to kind of reintroduce Syria into the fold, for stability of the region.
100%. The Saudis are all in on Syria in a way in which they're not in Gaza. And I think the Saudis are willing to play the game to try to outmaneuver the Turks in Damascus. But if the United
And the
States is going to,
Israelis, I think.
right, I mean, the Israelis, their position is they don't trust Assad, but they'd rather the Saudis than the Turks in Damascus.
Right.
When it comes to Gaza, if there's not going to be the actual disarmament of Hamas, and Hamas is
Then
going to
who
take
cares?
part in this technocratic government, the Saudis are like, well, what's this worth? We don't, why would we want to touch this with a
Right.
10-foot pole? Why would we want to
Right.
invest in this? So this is going to be a big problem going forward on the Gaza front, because you have essentially part of, the United States' closest partners in the region, the ones that Trump himself has been associated so closely with, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, have a different position from the administration, along with two other American partners, Turkey and
Yep.
Qatar, over
Yeah.
Gaza. It's going to be, I think there's going to be a lot of tension in the region over what goes forward, what goes on here going forward.
Um, Couple last questions. Sudan seems to be very important to the Saudis, and I think that might be a big discussion tomorrow. Do you?
I mean, the Horn of Africa is extremely important to the Gulf states. Its strategic depth,
But the
foods.
Saudis and the UAE seem to be on different sides of this.
Right. And it's not the first time the Saudis and the UAE are in different sides. They're in kind of different sides on one side of the Yemen conflict. It's funny that you asked this question, because my daughter, she's a sophomore in college, sent me a message, and she's like, just out of sheer curiosity, I've had some questions for you about Sudan. I think she's writing a paper about the Middle East. And I
I
said
hope
to her,
she's listening.
I said I could answer some questions about the UAE, but, you know, the the Emiratis are opposed to the forces that represent the central government in Sudan because they believe they're Muslim Brotherhood. The Saudis don't like the Muslim Brotherhood either, but I think they're looking at this more broadly and saying, we can't have this
This
mass chaos
right.
in the region. Look, the Saudis are making $1 trillion bet on Saudi Arabia, and Sudan is part of the region. The Gulf
And if
states
it
are
falls, it's a whole region of instability.
exactly. So
Right.
they're willing to look past it in the same way that, I mean, obviously Sudan is a larger scale, but in the same way that they don't want to see chaos in Syria,
In
and they don't
Gaza
want
or
chaos in
Gaza.
Gaza. Exactly.
Right.
But the Emiratis and the Saudis have a very different view of what the end game should be, and and what they're willing to compromise on going forward.
Well, I mean, if we think Gaza was bad, it's really bad in Sudan. One dog that I don't really think's going to bark tomorrow is human rights.
No. I mean, isn't it? It's quite extraordinary how far we've moved. It's only been, look, Jamal Khashoggi was murdered in October 2018. It was the furor in Washington was something that I don't think people had ever seen before,
Right.
and it prompted President Biden, as I said at the outset of our conversation, to essentially PNG Mohammed bin Salman. He, of course, had to walk that back for a variety of reasons, but President Trump, during his first term in office, wasn't terribly interested in the question of human rights. He
It
haven't
still
really,
isn't.
still isn't,
But
hasn't
but
talked
I
about
mean,
it at
look,
all.
even like Michael Ratney, the former ambassador to Saudi Arabia, was asked some questions about this the other day, and some of the things he were talking about, like, Ethiopian visa holders or whatever. I mean, it's just not something that people are very focused on. And it's not to say that Saudi Arabia still doesn't have human rights challenges, particularly
Of
when it
course not.
comes to political expression, particularly when it comes to women. Although they've come a long way. And I think it's really unfair when you're having this conversation about the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia to not acknowledge that we're in a different place than we were back during Khashoggi's
Absolutely.
time.
I think, the Saudi Arabia, for those people who haven't been there, is genuinely undergoing a social revolution at home. I mean, it is top down. It's not democratic. It's not liberal. But there are things that I've seen in Saudi Arabia that I never thought I would see. I mean, rather extraordinary.
And it's
The,
not just women driving. I mean, women
right.
have full rights. They may not have the cultural appreciation in
Just
society, but
I, I went to an art museum in Saudi Arabia. Like, that's wild. You didn't have that before. But I think the president really sets the frame and the agenda on the Saudi U.S. Saudi relationship. And go back and look at his speech in Riyadh in May, in which he basically said, "We're not going to lecture anybody on how they want to arrange their lives. These cities, states, and countries of the region have achieved a tremendous amount. They don't need our advice. They don't need our harangue about human rights." And I think that's going to carry throughout these conversations. And again, I think for people who are paying attention, it's not to suggest that Saudi Arabia doesn't have a human rights issues, but I don't think it's any worse than a lot of other countries in the region. And to frame the relationship solely around that, especially with a country that is as important as Saudi Arabia, is
hmm
I think the American foreign policy has just moved on from that, for better or for worse. Look, personally, I don't want a president of the United States who doesn't speak forcefully about human rights. I'm a little bit nervous, though, when they try to operationalize that and try to engineer politics in other countries. But I do want us
right.
to stand for something at least.
How much of Trump's personal business interests with Saudi Arabia color his fascination with the country, do you think?
It's hard to know, and because it's so hard to quantify where the president's,
Well, we heard
where
that there's going to be a new, in Daria, where we've both been, this new kind of old city,
the new old city exactly.
the
That's
new old
exactly what
city,
it is.
they're going to be building a Trump Tower. They're not, I mean, it's not like, Eric Trump, who was at FII, by the way, announcing all these things. They're not being shy about it.
No, I know. Is that the extent of it? What's happening with all kinds of other things? It's very, very hard. They're not shy about it, but it's also because they're not shy about it. It's really hard to quantify
Quantify.
it. I
Yeah.
think that the Saudis have sort of understood Trump from the very beginning. Um, Adulation, bling. Um,
And also the
it,
family. I think okay, Trump, I don't want to get into the metaphors of kings or any of that stuff,
right,
but
right,
the
right.
idea of family and, kind of dealing with one guy to another and his son, I think Trump really understands that, you know,
And in reverse, the Saudis and others really like the fact that Trump runs the United States kind of like the way they run their
right.
countries.
That's kind of what
Like
I
he's got
meant. I
five
didn't
guys on
say it that
WhatsApp,
articulately. Right, right,
or in Saudi Arabia's, five guys and one woman,
right,
Princess Rima
right,
on WhatsApp, and then right, like that's
right.
kind of the way Trump does it. So it's like
Yeah,
an easy way to do business. You don't have to like deal with the assistant secretary of state. Like Ambassador Ratney is an extraordinarily talented diplomat and a super nice guy, but with President Trump, they don't have to deal with the ambassador.
right,
They
right.
just call
Exactly,
the president or Susie
exactly.
Wiles or something like
Right,
that. So
right.
they like that.
And
There
that's how it
is
used to be with the Saudis anyway, with Bush and I think we're
right.
getting back to that type of time. Lastly, Stephen, if you had to identify the most single important outcome of tomorrow or, potential outcome from this visit that could set the trajectory for US Saudi relations over the next few years, how would you frame that?
Undoubtedly a security pact.
You
It,
think so? More than the AI.
it's all. I think
Okay.
it's all of a
It's
piece.
all related. Okay.
It's all related to each other, and a security pact, something that has never been written down before between the two countries. If we're going to write it down, and we're going to come to the defense of Saudi Arabia under a variety of conditions. That's a real change. It doesn't give us the opportunity to worm our way out of it, which is if you
Right.
sit down and talk to the Saudis, they will give you chapter and verse, 20 years in which we abrogated our responsibilities to them, even though we kept saying we're for the stability and security of the
Right.
region and we will come and defend you. And they tell you, here's like 12 things you didn't do that we expected.
Right.
Now it's going to be written down.
Yep. All right. Well, this was a great, as always, conversation, and you get extra points for staying up late from the Middle East. What are you, 7, 8 hours ahead?
I'm 7 and I'm pretty tired, but I'd do anything for you, Elise.
Thank you
And this
so
was a
much.
great
Thank you.
conversation.
It was.
Terrific
Thank you.
conversation.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. We'll be back later in the week with Danny Pletka for Hot Takes Happy Hour to talk more about this and other issues of the week, and look forward for future posts. And we'll have Stephen back very soon. Steve, thanks so much, Stephen, for joining
I'll
us.
see ya. Take care. Thanks,
Okay,
Elise.
bye bye.
Bye.
Lila Tov. Bye bye.
Good humor. Okay.